What was life like after the flood? Where did the ark land, and where did Noah first make camp and plant a vineyard? Where were the first settlements, and how did the sons of Noah migrate to establish nations around the world? Archaeology and the Bible should work together to give us answers to these questions. Unfortunately, most archaeologists treat the Bible as myth and don't believe in a global flood. Most Christians, for their part, ignore archaeology and tell the history of Genesis like children's stories. This is a problem. If archaeologists had more faith in the Bible, and if Christians did a better job studying archaeology, they would both be closer to the truth.
Of course, life after the flood only makes sense if there really was a flood. We're not going to debate that issue. You can find plenty of forums for that. I only want to make you aware of 6 areas of study that lead us to believe that there really was a global flood. This is good to know. We will cover ancient flood legends, ancient prophecies, geology, archaeology, language, and genetics. This should be enough for you to see that the flood is more than a children's story. I also want to introduce 2 new words, flood awareness and biblical paleoarchaeology. What do I mean by flood awareness? The Bible predicted that in the last days, people would be willingly ignorant of the flood. The opposite of being willingly ignorant is to be deliberately aware. People who choose to acknowledge a global flood can therefore be painted in a positive light as being flood aware. Flood awareness has a crucial impact on our understanding of history and life in general. The second word assimilates the technical word paleoarchaeology. Now, biblical archaeology has been popular since the days of William Albright, but it has always avoided dealing with the first 11 chapters of Genesis. This needs to be remedied. Paleo means old, so biblical paleoarchaeology applies biblical archaeology to the time before Abraham. It deals with prehistoric archaeology alongside the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Our first indication that there was a global flood comes from history itself. Flood stories have come down to us from some 300 ancient civilizations around the world. It's one thing for ancient Babylonians to have believed in a flood, but so did Hawaiians halfway around the world. The stories are all a little different, but they generally recount that water drowned almost everyone in the world because they were wicked. Only a few people survived the flood in a boat. The account from Genesis is the most believable of all the stories, and the precise details have been used to build a life-size replica of the ark and to build a geological model for the flood. Now, in 1928, Leonard Woolley announced that he had discovered Noah's flood at Ur, which created quite a sensation. Others found similar flooding at Kish and Shuruppak. The thickest sediment was 11 feet. Unfortunately for their claims, the floods happened in different centuries and were not even consistent within the same city. Other cities at the same elevation had no flooding. We must conclude that flooding came from rivers and not from the sea. Flooding was very localized and not even regional. There was certainly no reason for people in Hawaii to have written legends about a few local floods in Mesopotamia. Woolley's theory about a local flood has long since been discredited. The second reason to believe in a flood is because massive opposition to the flood was predicted 2 millennia ago. Belief in the flood was at least tolerated in cultures around the world up until the 19th century. The sudden change in popular opinion that happened around 1850 has been called the Great Turning Point by historian Terry Mortensen, which is the title of one of his books. It is commonly taught that people are smarter today than they were in previous centuries, and that is the reason why they deny the flood. The Bible, on the other hand, predicted that people would make willful decisions to deny the flood because they just thought they were smart. Romans 1:22 doesn't pull any punches in saying, claiming to be wise, they became fools. This phenomenon is known among Christians as the apostasy, or the great falling away, which precedes the visible return of Jesus Christ to the earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The Apostle Peter specifically mentions creation, the flood, and the final destruction of the earth by fire together in 2 Peter 3:5-7. These, he says, have happened and will happen by the words of God. That is, God spoke and the world was created. God spoke and the land masses were covered by a flood. God will speak and the world will be destroyed by fire. Peter also wrote that in the last days people will deliberately deny that God intervened supernaturally in creation. Since God predicted that people would deny the flood, we have good reason to believe that it is a matter of the will rather than of the mind. Geology is a third indication that the flood took place. When we inspect the surface of the earth, we find that it was deposited in layers of sediment. We refer to this as the geologic column. The sudden appearance of fossils near the bottom is known as the Cambrian explosion. Few fossils exist below this. Current geology teaches that it took 538,800,000 years to lay down all these fossil layers. According to the biblical flood model, it took place in 5 to 7.5 months. This is an enormous difference. Let's look at the evolutionary model from a different perspective. How fast was soil being deposited? If we can divide the depth of the geologic column by time, we can get the rate at which sediment was deposited. First, we need to find the depth of the famous geologic column. I can get this from Timothy Clary's book, Carved in Stone, page 213. The average depth across 3 continents has been measured to be 5,617 meters. That gives us an average rate of 1 millimeter of sediment and fossils being laid down every century. That is equivalent to 0.04 of an inch every 100 years, which is 1 inch every 2,500 years. Is this realistic? Not really. That's not enough to bury a fossil. Can we find any place on Earth where soil is accumulating consistently at a rate of 1 millimeter per century? If we can't find it in the present, then it probably didn't happen in the past. In 2013, geologist Timothy Clary took over the Column Project, which studied 1,544 rock cores from North, Central, and South America and from Africa. These he analyzed using RockWorks 17 software. His results were published in his 2020 book, Carved in Stone. As a result of his efforts, we now have a 3-dimensional model of how much of which rocks were laid down during each period of the flood. The flood has gone from being just a story to being a realistic reconstruction of history. The flood model explains many phenomena. One that is particularly interesting is the dinosaur peninsula, shown here from page 247 of Clary's book. Large dinosaurs are found buried together, with footprints heading toward higher ground. That is why we find dinosaur graveyards in Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta, Canada. We don't find smaller dinosaurs because they were evidently carried away by the rising waters. Could God have left a clearer message than 3.5 miles of solid rock spread over the entire world? The fourth indication of a global flood comes from archaeology, which will be the main focus of this series. Let's use a little math again and calculate how many humans are supposed to have lived on planet Earth during the 7 million years of human evolution. The Atlas of World Population History estimates that the hominin population was 1.7 million. They arrived at this by studying apes and supposing that early man lived like an ape. Lastly, if we assume that the average lifetime was 50 years, then the population would be renewing every 50 years. Now we can divide 7 million years by 50 years to find that there were supposedly 140,000 generations of hominins. When we multiply the number of generations by the population size, we find that 238 billion hominids are supposed to have lived on this planet. Let's take that one step further. If we divide the 7 million years of human evolution by a generous estimate of 3,000 fossils, we get one fossil, sometimes just a tooth, found in one place across the entire world every 2,400 years. Where did all the people go? When we look at human fossils, archaeology does not support the theory of millions of years of human evolution. On the other hand, the present population could have arisen from 8 people, starting with a flood around 2350 BC. Archaeology also shows us that there were 6 cradles of civilization, and the rest of the world was either empty or they left little evidence of human existence. The oldest cradle of civilization was the Fertile Crescent in the Near East. In other words, if so-called cavemen do not control the narrative, man is first found near the resting place of the ark. He is found farming, making pottery, and building houses. This is exactly what we expect to find after the flood. The 5th indication of a flood is the origin of languages. To make this quick, I will simply say that the first languages arose quickly in the Near East about the same time. They did not evolve over time from one original language. They were mysteriously unrelated. The miracle of Babel is the best explanation for this phenomenon. We don't know how many languages God created at Babel. As people separated from one another, new dialects arose from old ones. We can trace people groups migrating out of the Near East by following their language trails. The 6th indication of a flood comes from genetics. Nathaniel Jeanson, in his 2021 book Traced, uses haplogroups and Y chromosome genetics to trace the migration of people groups from the landing place of the ark in the Near East to the present. By doing this, he has opened up an entirely new area of research, and is only beginning as other people get involved. His approach shows the future of creationism. Rather than using a negative approach of showing the weaknesses in human evolution, he is creating a positive model by showing support for the biblical model. His first bombshell revelation came from the study of mutation rates. By using recent values for mutation rates, he claims that the history of civilization only goes back 4,500 years to Noah and 6,000 years to Adam. His graph shows known population values back to 1000 BC. Then he overlays it with values from Y chromosome rates. This brings the beginning of population growth back to the time of the flood. The greatest part of Jeanson's book traces the migrations of haplogroups out of the Near East into the rest of the world. He shows how migrations could have begun in the Near East rather than Africa. Then he goes a step further and links the haplogroups to Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons. This is not an exact science, but a work in progress. Nonetheless, it provides a working model that can be tested and refined. Notice particularly that he links haplogroup T to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and also back to Shem. This is a huge step forward toward positive modeling. I have quickly mentioned 6 areas of study that support a Genesis model of a global flood and a recent origin. They are ancient flood legends, ancient prophecies, geology, archaeology, language, and genetics. I only mention these so that those who are extremely doubtful of the flood can take it seriously. Too many people are completely unaware of the advances that have taken place in creationism in the past and that are currently underway. Life after the flood is a model. It is a reconstruction of history that assumes that Genesis is true and that the flood really took place. I hope you will continue to follow this series and take it for what it's worth. Of all the places around the world where civilization could have arisen, it happened in the land where the Bible says the ark landed. If the Bible had said the Himalayas, we could dismiss the Bible as myth. If the Bible had said the Alps, we could dismiss the Bible as myth. The Bible says that the ark landed on the mountains of Ararat, just above the Fertile Crescent. Now the adventure really begins as we trace Noah's family from Ararat to the countries that lie round about it.